I have covered music for 31 years, and in that time I have sat through more auditions than I can sensibly count. Regional finals, conservatory open rounds, junior showcases where prodigies played technically correct renditions of pieces they plainly did not understand. I have heard brilliance. I have heard catastrophe. I have heard, with numbing regularity, the particular species of confident mediocrity that the well-funded tend to produce, students who had been told, since the age of 4, that they were extraordinary, and had believed it without question ever since. What I had never heard, in 31 years, was what I heard that Tuesday afternoon, in the audition corridor of the Ashbourne Conservatory, and I had certainly never heard it begin the way it began. In a hushed argument outside a closed door, between a man in a pressed gray suit and a man in a washed-out jacket that still held, along the left shoulder, a very faint impression of where a rank badge had once been sewn. I had arrived early. That was the thing. My feature on the conservatory's autumn intake was due Friday, and I had wanted the texture of the place before the official program began. The acoustics of the hallway, the smell of old rosin and floor polish, the particular quality of light through the tall windows that faces north and never quite warms. I was making notes by the water fountain when Professor Aldous Kincaid came around the corner with 2 members of the admissions panel and nearly walked into the young man waiting outside the audition room door. The young man was 27, perhaps 28, dark-haired, solidly built in the way that men are when they have spent years doing physical work outdoors rather than in. He held a canvas bag in one hand and a printed admissions letter in the other, and he was studying the letter as though looking for an error in it. Kincaid stopped. He looked at the letter, then at the young man, then at the letter again. Mr. Morrow, Professor Kincaid. The young man's voice was level, not nervous, not combative, just level, in the manner of someone who has been trained to sound level when the situation is not. I sent that correspondence last week. Kincaid's tone was not unkind, exactly. It was the tone of a man who considers himself reasonable and wishes the record to reflect this. The bursary committee reviewed your application at length. We were very grateful for your service. A brief, almost involuntary pause on the word, as though it were a technical term he was not certain he was using correctly. But the admissions standard is what it is. No formal study prior to age 19. 8 years gap. The foundation simply isn't there. I did explain this in the letter. You did, said Daniel Morrow. He didn't look away. Kincaid glanced at his colleagues. One of them, a woman I recognized as Dr. Eileen Farrow, head of keyboard studies, was looking at her watch. The other, a gray-haired man whose name I didn't know, was examining the far wall with the focused attention of a person who wishes very much to be somewhere else. Is there something else I can help you with? Said Kincaid. Daniel Morrow looked at the door of the audition room. There was a pause. In it, I heard the distant sound of a student running scales somewhere above us. Tentative, mechanical, searching for a phrase that wasn't coming. Then Kincaid did something I have thought about many times since. I do not know whether it was impatience, or a residual guilt he wished to discharge, or simply the automatic reflex of a man who has spent 40 years in music education and cannot pass a piano without wanting to hear something played. On it, he gestured at the door. Very well, he said. The room is empty for another 20 minutes. Play us something. At least then you'll know for yourself. It was not a generous offer. The smile that came with it was thin as paper. It said, I am giving you the courtesy of a hearing you have not earned, so that when you will leave without argument. Daniel Morrow nodded once. He picked up his bag. He opened the door. I followed them in. No one stopped me. Perhaps they forgot I was there. Perhaps it didn't seem worth the effort. Kincaid and his colleagues took 3 chairs along the far wall, and I stood near the door with my notebook open, and for a moment the room was simply a room. High-ceilinged, north-lit, smelling of wood and old air, with a Steinway Model D at its center, polished to a black that held the window's reflection in it, like still water. Daniel Morrow set his bag down on the floor beside the bench. He sat. He adjusted the bench once, by perhaps 2 centimeters, with the careful economy of someone who knows exactly what he needs. He rested his hands in his lap. He looked at the keys. Kincaid uncapped a pen, ready to note, I supposed, whatever deficiency was about to present itself. Dr. Farrow had put her watch away. The first chord of Beethoven's Appassionata landed in that room like a door coming off its hinges. Not violent, not showy, but utterly without warning. F minor, low and wide, the bass notes rolling under the treble in that long descending phrase that opens the sonata's first movement, and the sound that came out of that Steinway was not the sound I had expected to hear from a young man in a washed-out jacket who had spent the last 8 years not at a piano. It was full. It was controlled in the way that only very certain hands are controlled. Not rigid, but grounded, each note placed with the precision of someone who knows exactly how much weight the phrase will hold before it gives. I stopped writing. Kincaid's pen did not move. The Appassionata is not a piece for showing off. That is the first thing you learn about it, and the second thing, and the third. It does not reward prettiness or display. It rewards honesty, the willingness to hold the tension in the low register without flinching, to let the lyrical second theme breathe without sentimentalizing it, to build the development section with the patience of someone who is not afraid of the dark and is not in any hurry to leave it. It is a piece that asks the pianist to know something, not just to have practiced something, but to know it, to have carried it through something, to bring to it a weight that does not come from conservatory training. Daniel Morrow played it like a man who had been carrying it for years. He had. I found out later, much later, in a phone call with a woman named Ellen Morrow, his mother, who wept on the phone and then apologized for weeping, and then wept again. That he had taught himself to play in the first place from a battered volume of Beethoven his father had left behind when he went. That he had played through the night before his enlistment, 17 hours in a row, until his mother came downstairs at 2 in the morning and found him at the keyboard with his head bowed. That during 8 years as a medic in places I will not name here because they are not mine to name, he had carried a pair of headphones and a recording, a very old recording, surface noise and all, and played it in the dark between shifts until he knew every phrase from the inside. None of that was in the room yet. What was in the room was the music. The development section arrived, and Daniel Morrow did not manage it. He inhabited it, the left hand driving the counterpoint, while the right held the melody at the edge of the tempo. Not rushing, never rushing, and the dynamic shifts were not effects. They were arguments, and each argument was part of a larger argument, and the larger argument was about something I did not have words for in the moment, and am still not entirely sure I have words for now. Doctor. Pharaoh's hands, which had been folded in her lap, were pressed together in front of her mouth. The gray-haired man who had been studying the far wall had turned his chair, somewhere in the first movement's exposition, so that he was facing the piano directly. I did not see him do it. I simply noticed at a certain point that he had. Kincaid had not moved. His pen was on the floor. He had not noticed. The second movement came, andante con moto, the theme and variations, and the temperature of the room changed. This is the movement that makes orchestral musicians weep, because it asks the pianist to sustain a singing tone through a sequence of variations that escalate from simplicity to a complexity. So extreme it threatens to break the melodic line entirely. And Daniel Morrow did not let it break. He let it bend. He let it stretch to the point of almost. And then, at the moment when the listener's breath catches in their throat, he brought it back, quietly, as if it had never been in any danger. That was when I understood what I was listening to. I have heard technically superior pianists play this movement. I have heard conservatory-trained performers with decades of concert experience play it with flawless pedal technique and impeccable voicing and the complete absence of any sense that it cost them anything at all. What Daniel Morrow was playing was not technically superior. There was a moment in the second variation where his left hand fractionally mistimed an entry, a quarter beat, no more, and he adjusted without breaking stride, the way a good soldier adjusts on uneven ground. It cost him. That was the point. You could hear that it cost him. You could hear, in the weight he put through the keys, in the way he held the fermatas a half-second longer than is fashionable, that this music had been kept for a long time in a place that was very small and very dark, and that playing it now, in a high-ceilinged room with north light, and 3 people who had decided before he sat down that he wasn't good enough, playing it now was an act of a very specific kind of courage. The third movement began. Kincaid made a sound. I am not sure how to describe it. Not a word, not a cough. Something between the two. Sound that a man makes when something he has decided turns out, mid-decision, to be wrong, and he has not yet worked out what to do with that information. The finale of the Appassionata is barely controllable. That is its design. It builds in waves that compound each other, and each wave is slightly larger than the last. and the job of the pianist is not to conquer it but to ride it to the exact edge, and hold it there, so that when the final chords arrive, the listener does not feel relief. They feel completion, the feeling of a thing that has come back to where it began by a route that was longer and darker and more honest than anyone bargained for. Daniel Morrow took it to the edge. He held it there. The last chord landed and died in the room's acoustics, and the resonance moved through the wood of the Steinway, and the floorboards, and the walls, and the high ceiling. And then it was gone, and there was nothing left but the silence that follows something true. Daniel Morrow sat with his hands in his lap. He did not look at Kincaid. He did not look at any of us. Dr. Farrow stood. She did not do it deliberately, I think. She simply found herself standing. And then she sat back down, and then after a moment she stood again properly and kept standing. The gray-haired man said very quietly, "My God." Kincaid said nothing. Daniel Morrow picked up his canvas bag. He stood. He adjusted the bench back to where he had found it, 2 centimeters. And he straightened up and put the strap of the bag over his shoulder. "Thank you for the room," he said. He walked to the door. Kincaid found his voice somewhere around then. "Mr. Morrow," he stood. "The committee. I would need to speak to the committee, but I think we could." "I appreciate it," said Daniel Morrow. He had his hand on the door. "I didn't come for the place." Kincaid blinked, "Then why?" Daniel Morrow looked at the piano, not at Kincaid, at the piano. 8 years is a long time to not play," he said. "I just wanted to know if I still could." He opened the door and walked out. For a moment no one spoke. Dr. Farrow was still standing. The gray-haired man had both hands on his knees. Kincaid was looking at the space where the young man had been, and on his face was an expression. "I have spent 3 years trying to find a single word for, and the closest I have managed is this." The look of a man who has just been corrected on something very important, without anyone having raised their voice. I wrote it all down, every word. It ran in 4 publications over the following month, and the response I received was unlike anything I had experienced in 31 years of music journalism. Letters, calls, emails from veterans and teachers and retired musicians, and one retired general who wrote 3 pages in a very small, very precise hand that I still have somewhere in a drawer. But what I think about most, in the quiet way one thinks about the things that genuinely shift one's understanding, is not the performance itself. It is that 2-centimeter adjustment of the bench. The care with which he left the room exactly as he had found it. The fact that he had not come to prove anything to Kincaid, or to the panel, or to me. He had come back to the piano. That was all. The piano had been waiting. The rest of us had simply been in the room.